So to break down the latest in these water wars, I'm joined by Upmanu Lall, director of the Columbia Water Center. Thank you so much, Upmanu, for joining me. You know, in the story we just saw there, Florida is suing the state of Georgia because it's overusing its water resources. Are other U.S. states facing similar conflicts?
Yeah, thank you, Ameera. The water conflicts of this sort are actually not that uncommon. And if you look at the history of America, in the West, water wars were endemic, and then they were solved by developing compacts across states as to who gets what. But even the most famous of those, the Colorado River Compact, which was set up in the 1920s, it turned out they never thought about what climate really means and what it does. So people today talk about climate change, but climate is continuously variable. And what that means is that you can have 10 or 12 years or 20 years that are relatively wet, and then the subsequent 10 or 12 or 20 years may be dry. So if you do, like they did with the Colorado River, come up to an agreement where you allocate the waters of the river to different states or to different organizations in proportion to what you think is available on average, then when you switch from a wet to a dry phase, you are suddenly in trouble. So this has happened in the Colorado, and effectively what saved us there was that it took a long time for the upper states in the Colorado, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and so forth, to develop enough of a demand that it was an issue. But today it is an issue, and the operations of that river system are under a continuing resolution with the Department of the Interior, with negotiations every single year.
Absolutely. You know, in the Florida-Georgia case in particular, the dispute was mainly over the falling revenue for oyster businesses. Do you think it takes business interests to really spur change?
I think that is what it's going to come down to, because since the 1980s, when President Reagan was in office, the federal government, other than environmental regulation, has gotten out of the business of managing or planning or developing a water resource. So all of a sudden we find that states have water programs, but when it comes to an issue which is across states, there's really no clear federal paradigm for doing it. And the people or the groups that are hurt most often are the financial interests of businesses whose supply chains rely on that water. Most of the water in the country is used for food production or for energy production. So those are the businesses that will emerge at the forefront of this debate.
Sure. Well, you know, we've heard people say now that water is the new oil. It's the oil of the next generation. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Not quite. It's obviously very valuable. As a person who works on water, I love it when people try to extol the virtues of water and its value. But realistically, there's a few differences. And the key difference is that water is a renewable resource. We have the hydrological cycle that we all learn about in kindergarten. So there's a certain amount of rainfall that we receive as a renewal process every year, unlike coal or oil, which is essentially being mined. However, beyond that, in places such as the Ogallala Aquifer in the United States or Central Valley in California or in parts of Florida, we do have groundwater which is 100 to 100,000 years old, and people have been extracting it, and we might run out of it. So in that sense, yes, we might be looking at it as oil. On the other hand, with oil, the prices and the value of oil seem to be pretty well established by the market. However, with water, because it's been dealt with as a public sector resource, it's relatively unpriced, and so we don't really know what we should assign as value to it. And I think that's going to come first before we start having wars over it.
Sure. And what would you say is the best way really to resolve these kinds of conflicts, like the one we've seen between Florida, Alabama, and Georgia? Is taking it to the courts the best answer at this point?
Well, you know, even if you take it to the courts, the first thing a court will ask is, what is the nature of this resource? How much is really available? How often is it available? What's the quality of the water that's available? And they'll need to know that before they start assigning rights to different people. The problem we have is that we have not gone through that exercise systematically across the country, and we don't have a paradigm for how much value should we assign to the environment versus production of energy from water versus production of food versus providing water for drinking. Most people think that the main use of water is what they do use domestically, but that's actually a very small fraction of the overall use. So your question earlier about the business interest, I think that's what's going to come to the fore, and particularly in the Southwest. And actually, if you look at the political map of the United States, in much of the red states, that's where the water issues are going to emerge as paramount. So,
Absolutely. I'm so sorry to cut in, but we've unfortunately run out of time. But I do appreciate you coming on. Upmanu Lall, Director of the Columbia Water Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Ameera.